Hey everybody! You ever just want to get super baked and rant a little bit about your favorite old video games? Me too. And that's why we're here, plain and simple. If that sounds like something you'd vibe with, hop on board amigo, we're going places. I thought a lot about the first game I would want to cover. It's a big decision. This is the icebreaker, the jumping off point for God's sake. Where to start? Might as well go back to the beginning with Zelda, the series that got me into gaming. Besides, I don't think a lot of people talk about these games. They're a little niche, you feel me? Let's show Zelda some representation. Alright, that was obviously a joke. But in all seriousness, there are a quirky little pair of Zelda games that I personally can never seem to get enough content of. I love The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages, and Oracle of Seasons. Who doesn't? Honestly, these games are wildly acclaimed and yet nobody ever talks about them. I will say that King K and Liam Triforce both have killer retrospectives on these games, and I would highly recommend them to anyone looking for YouTubers better at this than I am. But that being said, it's time to toss my own hat into the ring, let my voice join the YouTube rabble as I try my absolute darndest to say something original about a very special pair of Zelda games. Spark a blunt, pack a bowl, sit back and relax with your old buddy Stoney as we take a hazy look back at The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages, and Oracle of Seasons. Seasons and Ages hit the scene in 2001 and were the result of the odd choice that Nintendo made to enlist Capcom in the creation of a number of fresh new 2D Zelda titles. Now I say odd choice here because this was the video game industry equivalent of Nintendo tossing Capcom the keys to the Jag and saying, "Here, try not to scratch it, kid." This was strange, especially considering how protective Nintendo are with their key IP. But as usual, Nintendo knew exactly what they were doing because these games are fucking awesome. Straight up. What began as a triforce of 3 connected games eventually boiled down to 2 games, connected by a password system that was actually pretty neat for the time. By beating one game, you'd be provided with a password that you could enter upon the start of a new file on the next game, essentially linking the 2 games and allowing you to carry your first game into the next. I remember my 8-year-old mind was blown by this prospect. So you're telling me that I get to play this brand new, full-length 8-dungeon Zelda game and then carry my adventure over into yet another, brand new, full-length 8-dungeon Zelda game? Complete with character crossovers, references to my past deeds, and additional bonus content? Sold! Take my money, Nintendo. You earned it. That's what Planet Earth said anyway, as each game went on to sell almost 4 million copies apiece, which was a massive feat considering the Game Boy Color was on its way out the door as Nintendo got ready to advance. This is a little off topic, but I'm about 3 dabs deep in here, so indulge me. But I've always said that Pokemon would have been well served to take a leaf out of Zelda's playbook here. Having 2 linkable games with 2 different worlds and stories, but connected by the player character. Imagine a world where Pokemon Red and Blue were actually 2 different games like the Oracles. 2 different regions, 2 different Pokemon leagues, and yet linked by the character and their Pokedex. You could complete Red, conquer the Pokemon League, and catch all the Pokemon available in that game. Then, using a similar system to the Oracles, carry that character and Pokedex over into Blue, where a fresh new adventure, a fresh new Pokemon League challenge would be awaiting you. Nintendo still profits off of having 2 games with Pokemon unique to each cartridge, but it also incentivizes the player to purchase both cartridges, instead of simply trading with their friends, as they would have a whole new game to play as they filled out those missing pieces of their Pokedex. Now I'm sure this is one of those easier said than done scenarios, and as I'm not a video game developer, I have no idea how difficult implementing this kind of system in a game as complicated as Pokemon would be, but hey, it'd be dope. And I can dream. And it's my video, so it really doesn't matter which game you start with, you'll get a unique experience either way, which greatly strengthens the replayability in these titles, by the way. You can beat seasons and carry on to ages, or vice versa, each gameplay experience being altered by that decision. Personally, I like to take on seasons first. I love seasons for what it is, a very straight-to-the-point, no-nonsense adventure. Supposedly based on the Triforce of Power, this game has a heavy focus on gameplay and action, borrowing heavy inspiration from the OG Zelda on NES. On the flip side of this is Ages, which is supposed to be the Triforce of Wisdom, being heavier on puzzles and narrative. And while neither game is exactly a page-turner in terms of story, Ages definitely hits harder on those narrative elements. This disparity is clear as day when you look at each game's intros. Over here in Ages, you arrive in Labrina, unsure of what to expect other than a text box saying, "Accept our quest, hero." You move up a screen to find Impa being attacked by monsters, all who flee at the sight of the crest on your hand, supposedly the sign of a Hyrulean hero. She thanks you and tells you she's looking for a singer named Nehru and asks you to accompany her to her destination should the foul creatures return. You arrive at a stone blocking the path and Impa starts acting strange. She claims she can't move the stone and asks you to please do it for her. This is not odd in itself. Maybe it's a heavy stone. Maybe Impa doesn't lift. But the way Impa behaves at this moment makes the player think something isn't quite kosher here. Past the stone, you come to a clearing where a young woman is singing to an entranced circle of animal and human characters. You learn that this is in fact Nehru, who is accompanied by an annoying pile of turds named Ralph. Ralph recognizes you and Impa as messengers from Hyrule, sent by Zelda because it was foretold that Labrina was doomed to face dark times in the near future. How this was foretold is never really elaborated on. Everyone just seems to know that some shit's about to hit the fan and Link and Impa are there to help. However, Ralph, who supposedly has been protecting Nehru since she was a child, scoffs and claims that he doubts they'll need your help. Oh, Ralph. You stupid, unlikable idiot. All of a sudden, Impa starts laughing. Not at the hilarious joke Ralph just told, but, sinisterly. It turns out she's being possessed by the sorceress Varen, who has come to possess Nehru, who it turns out is not just a singer, she's, get this, the Oracle of Ages, with the ability to manipulate and travel through time. Varen was being held back by a sacred barrier in the form of the stone that you helped her move out of the way earlier. But now she's able to make her move. She leaves Impa's body and instead possesses Nehru. Ralph quickly draws his sword on her, but Varen taunts him, reminding him that by killing her, he'd be killing Nehru as well. Ralph backs off. Varen jumps to a ledge, a portal appears and she disappears to the past. The timeline is thrown into absolute disarray. An old woman's grandson is turned to stone. A species of monkeys goes extinct. This guy turns old for some reason. Shit gets nuts. Ralph collapses on the ground, lamenting his failure to save Nehru. Before long, though, he resolves to follow Varen into the past and fix his mistake. After speaking to Impa, you agree that Ralph has absolutely no chance of handling this situation by himself because he sucks. And you'd better go with him if there's going to be any chance of actually saving Nehru and fixing the timeline. This is the setup to Oracle of Ages. Now, let's take a look at Seasons. Din finds you unconscious. You wake up. Going right one screen, you find a traveling dance troupe. Impa's here. Din's glad you're awake. Let's dance. Onyx attacks! He takes Din to his castle and puts her in a crystal. The Temple of Seasons falls. The world's climate is thrown into chaos as seasons change minute to minute. He's the general of goddamn darkness. Impa tells you have to go. You have to go save Din because she's actually the Oracle of Seasons. Now go! And bada bing bada boom, you are released onto the world of Holodrum with, I shit you not, little to no more narrative than this until you are on Onyx's doorstep. The wild thing about these two intros is that you actually complete them in roughly the same amount of time. It's just how much more is packed in the Ages intro because it's setting up a much denser story. Throughout Ages, you'll run into Ralph on your parallel journeys to save Nehru. Then, believe it or not, You actually save Nehru about halfway through the story, and she becomes an interactable NPC for the rest of the game. You're treated to cutscenes of Ambi and the progress of the Black Tower, reminding you every so often that Varen is moving closer and closer to achieving her goal of reaching the heavens. It makes sense that with such an involved story, the intro would have to be equally involved. Ralph is annoying, sure, but you can't help but feel for him when he slumps down, devastated that he allowed his best friend to be kidnapped. You feel guilty. After all, you're the one who moved the stone, allowing Varen to reach Nehru in the first place. You and Link both have an emotional stake in this adventure that goes beyond the basic "you're the hero, go save the girl" motif. Seasons, on the other hand, takes this motif in stride. You have zero time to connect with Din or Onyx because, honestly, you don't have to. Once Onyx takes Din away, both are virtually absent from the game until the end. Like the very end. Unlike Varen, who is a present force throughout ages, actively working towards her goal to complete the Black Tower, Onyx achieves his goal in the first 5 minutes. He locks up Din, destroys the Temple of Seasons, and throws the world into chaos. He's won. Nothing to do now but wait for a kid in a green hat to come fuck it up for him. And the coolest part about both of these intros and their stories is that they both work so well in their own rights. Seasons isn't shitty because its story is basic. This lack of narrative helps strengthen the focus on gameplay that they were going for. You don't need a bunch of fluff. You are the hero. Go save the girl. In the same respect, Ages doesn't drag because there are so many more cutscenes and character moments. Those things strengthen the story-heavy Zelda they were creating, and reinforces the attachment that the player has to these characters who are much more involved than their Seasons counterparts. This is the beauty of the Oracle games. No matter your playstyle, these games have something to offer everybody. Everyone's going to have their preference, of course, but that's exactly how these games were designed, to be preferred by one type of fan or the other, while combining to create a gaming experience that surpasses anything they could have achieved on their own. Now earlier when I said that these were 2 full-length 8-dungeon Zelda games, I wasn't kidding. There are 16 brand spanking new dungeons spread across these bad boys. And I know what you're thinking. There's absolutely no way they came up with enough content to make 16 well-structured, unique, and memorable dungeons. Well, my friends, you are absolutely right. They're not all bangers, that's for sure. Gnarled Root and Spirit's Grave are definitely baby's first dungeons. Linear, easy, showing players the general dungeon layout and what kind of things to expect moving forward. Poison Moth's Lair has a solid enough boss fight, but I find the dungeon itself is pretty forgettable. Honestly, even as I sit here recording this, I can't think of one cool thing to mention about this dungeon. Likewise, Crown Dungeon is one of my favorite boss fights across both games. A cool fight against Smog, where you have to force his body parts back together before you can do any damage. But the sprawling, horizontal, backtracky layout of the dungeon itself is super annoying to me. But honestly, despite these outliers, what I find so impressive about these games is how many of these 16 dungeons are bangers. Jabu Jabu's Belly in Ages is one of the most complex dungeons in 2D Zelda history. No contest. If you don't believe me, go play this dungeon right now. Come back and talk to me when you can't find that third water level switch, okay? There is so much mental mapping that you have to do in this dungeon that it is absolutely bonkers. And then right when you think you're getting close to the end, whoops, nope, sorry, you need 30 more keys before you get the boss key, bitch! Snake's Remains in Seasons is pretty fun for a second dungeon, and it even has a brief in and out section where you leave the dungeon, go outside, and re-enter another part of the dungeon. A cool little nod to the Desert Palace and a link to the past. Ancient Tomb makes you feel like goddamn Indiana Jones. You have to collect these 4 ancient tablets and put them in their pedestals to open the secret passageway. You're racing across lava pits as the floor melts beneath you. Gibdos and ghosts litter the rooms. Each step forward brings you further into the tomb with a map design that's super vertical, making the player feel like they really are descending deeper and deeper into a crypt. The ambiance in this dungeon is top notch, and the music just caps it. Sword and Shield Maze is a fun little dungeon whose first and second floor are shaped like a sword and a shield respectively. It is also a maze. This one really delivers on the title. It's crazy how well these games were able to work their core thesis into every aspect of these dungeons. Seasons wants to be all Action Jackson over here, so the dungeons reflect that. It has a lot more rooms that are purely dedicated to just bashing enemies for a key. It may shake things up with how you bash those enemies, but at the end of the day you are still just bashing enemies. It asks more of the player's timing and reaction than their critical thinking, often forcing you into tight spaces with mobile enemies that will chip away your health fast if you let them. There are solid puzzles, it is a Zelda game, but there are also a lot of puzzles that look like this. I wonder what I should do here. This is 3 dungeons in, by the way. But one thing Seasons does not pull punches on are the bosses. Oh my god, the bosses! Goma has evolved from spider to crab and has a claw with which she will literally pick you up, slam you into the floor repeatedly, and throw you across the room, doing massive damage. Mothula is literally just a flying Moldorm in the sense that he will continuously try to knock you into this pit and restart the entire fight like a complete fucking asshole. Except you know what's cool? He also shoots fireballs and spawns mini moths to attack you. Moldorm couldn't do that. You fight 1, 2, 3 different dragons. 4 dragons if you count Gleok's other head. Speaking of heads, have you heard of Medusa's head? Boss of Sword and Shield Maze, who can literally turn you to stone and wreck your shit? Digdogger is bouncing all over the goddamn room while you simultaneously push and pull this big metal spike ball into him that can also damage you, by the way. It is a spike ball. And when you finally get him, he splits into a bunch of little guys that you also have to hit with the spike ball and... fuck! A lot of these fights again rely a lot more on reaction and timing than thinking your way through them, and are the perfect cherry on top to the combat-heavy dungeon Sundays leading up to them. As you can imagine, dungeons and ages are handled very differently. Unlike Seasons' one-room combat challenges, Ages puzzles will often span many rooms, sometimes the entire dungeon, and this makes each dungeon a lot more cohesive. Like a big puzzle you're solving one room at a time until it all clicks. And again, this doesn't mean that the bosses and the fights in Ages aren't challenging, they're just different. More strategy focused, making the player think a little bit instead of relying on spamming that sword button. Ages is constantly asking itself, how can I stump the player next? And so it's not just enough to make the dungeons themselves puzzling. Just getting yourself from dungeon to dungeon can sometimes be a mental marathon. And a lot of it is baked into that richer main story, like when you have to find mystery seeds to bring to Ambi in order to get the bombs that allow you to enter the wing dungeon. Or when you save Nehru and she gives you the final song for your harp, which will allow you to access Zora Village and Jabu Jabu's belly respectively. The path to Moonlit Grotto in Ages is honestly so long, so convoluted that it feels like getting to the dungeon is the dungeon. And I love every second of it, don't get me wrong. But there is so much you have to do between Dungeons 2 and 3 in Ages that it is honestly a little disarming. I'm not going to go into detail here, but King K does a really good breakdown of the series of events you follow, and it is absolutely nuts. Ages really does use its overworld like it is itself a giant overarching dungeon. Seasons dungeons are more often than not just sitting there, waiting for you, almost daring you to enter. Sure, it often requires a certain item or season, but that's about as complex as it's gonna get. Hell, after you get the flippers, you can skip right on by the 4th dungeon and go straight to Unicorn's Cave if you want, grabbing the power of autumn before spring along the way. While not massively altering to the game, it is a nice little nod to the non-linearity of OG Zelda, and it helps repeat playthroughs if just a little bit. And we can't talk about dungeons without talking about the dungeon items! Yeah, baby, let's take a look. We got the classics coming back. We got your power gloves. We have our bombs, Rock's Feather, Rock's Cape, but then we also have some cool newcomers, like the Switch Hook. It's basically a hook shot, but instead of pulling you over, you swap places with whatever it grabs. I don't really get the physics of this, but I don't really get the physics of a lot of Zelda items, so that's okay. The Cane of Samaria is back from A Link to the Past and helps deliver some pretty cool puzzle solving. I really like how you can use it in the 2D sections like a little step up, a dope addition. The seed shooter and the slingshot let you shoot seeds, though the shooter lets you shoot in 8 different directions and bounces off walls, while the slingshot is mostly just a slingshot. And of course I couldn't not mention one of the coolest Zelda items in the entire series, the magnetic gloves. Honest to God, I don't know how these things haven't been used in more Zelda games. They are so dope. You can pull the metal masks off of enemies, push or pull metal objects to you, push or pull Link depending on the situation. These things have so many uses and are such an awesome puzzle and combat mechanic that I seriously don't understand how we haven't seen them since. I want these bad boys in 3D like yesterday. So yeah, they're not all 5 stars as far as Zelda goes, and let's be honest, the series sets that bar pretty high. But the dungeons in these games are very good, and I would go so far as to say that they rival anything in Link's Awakening or A Link to the Past. I'm sure some people would really not agree with that, but that's my honest takeaway from these dungeons. 16 unique, challenging Zelda dungeons is a tall fucking order, let alone on your very first try. And in my opinion, these are 16 rock-solid entries into the series that Capcom can confidently point to and say, yeah, tell us we don't understand Zelda, punk. Even though Seasons and Ages borrowed a lot from Link's Awakening, and I mean a lot, Capcom made sure to do a good bit to have these games stand out from the crowd. Looking past the obvious, and by that I mean the game linking and the Seasons and Ages mechanics, these games actually brought a lot of cool things to the table that you won't find in their predecessors. The mystical seeds are the first thing that come to mind. The first item you get in each game is the Seed Satchel, and with it the ability to carry all of the magical seeds that you'll discover across your adventure. There are Ember Seeds that burn bushes and ignite torches, Scent Seeds that attract monsters, Pegasus Seeds that allow you to dash like you're wearing the Pegasus boots, Mystery Seeds that have mysterious applications, and Gale Seeds which will warp you to any seed tree, acting as these games' fast travel system. These seeds were a stroke of genius, and they allow for a lot of varied gameplay. Have a super fast boss? Use those Pegasus Seeds for an extra boost. Enemies across a gap and you're all out of bombs? Drop a Scent Seed. They'll fall into the gap themselves just trying to get to it. These seeds are such a cool way to have a ton of mechanics without killing inventory space. They're all kept in the satchel. They're like the transformation masks in Majora. A lot of abilities wrapped into one convenient item slot. You don't need to fill up that inventory with lanterns or Pegasus boots when you have a bag full of seeds. Speaking of seeds, you can't talk about the Oracle games without bringing up the seed rings. This is Vasu. He's a jeweler who deals specifically in magic rings made from the mystical seeds. These rings are possibly the coolest new thing the Oracles introduce. They're basically used as buffs that grant Link various attributes and abilities. The power rings will increase your attack power while also increasing the damage you take. Likewise, armor rings will decrease the damage you take, but will decrease the damage you deal as well. The appropriately named Rang ring will increase your boomerang's damage, and the Steadfast ring will decrease your knockback. In addition to these combat-focused rings, you'll also get quality of life improvements like the Toss ring, that allows you to throw items farther, the Pegasus ring, that increases the duration of Pegasus seeds, or the Rocks ring, which will make it so cracked floors won't break when you stand on them. I mean shit, there's a ring that turns you into an Octorok for God's sake. Aside from a few rings in set locations, these rings are 100% RNG based, and you will find rings constantly throughout both adventures. The RNG comes in when you take your found rings to Vasu and he appraises them to let you know which ring it is you found. And yes, you can find multiple of the same ring which Vasu will offer to buy back from you. These are such a breath of fresh air to the series, especially the 2D entries. Any reward I can hunt for that's not just rupees and heart pieces, I am 100% here for. Awakening had the secret shells, yeah, but the payoff for those was a lot slower. With each new ring you find, you rush off to Vasu to find out which one it is, excited at the prospect of the new power-up or ability you'll be able to make use of right there and then. It's such a palpable excitement, it makes you feel like you really are finding treasure. Capcom does a lot of cool things with RNG in these games. There are these cool little things called gacha seeds, and you plant them in scattered patches of soft soil. And after a set amount of time, they'll grow into a tree that sprouts a nut. Inside this nut is a prize. It can be anything from rupees to rings to magic potions, and the quality of the prize you receive depends on how well hidden the patch of soil you planted in was. And I only just realized now as I type this that gacha seeds are probably a witty wordplay on gotcha seeds. That makes sense. God, these games are fantastic. Another cool addition of RNG is Maple, a sassy witch who flies around and will occasionally bump into you, knocking both hers and your items across the screen. You then get to race her to see who can grab the most stuff in a neat little mini game of Finders Keepers. What a cool little addition, like whose idea was this? Who came up with this? Charming as fuck. And I haven't even mentioned your animal companions, Moosh, Ricky, and Dimitri, each with distinct abilities and personalities, or Season's subworld of Subrosia, which has absolutely no business being as detailed and explorable as it is. It adds a substantial chunk to Season's overworld. Capcom went a long way to make sure the player was never bored in these games, and was always doing something or finding something fun, useful, or both. But of course, with the good always comes the bad, and not every idea was a winner. Some came out a little half-baked, you feel me? And the most glaring example of this is the titular Seasons mechanic in Oracle of Seasons. This mechanic was pretty obviously an afterthought. Something to round out both games and give each one a specific gimmick to market. Age's mechanic was expertly used. It was crucial to puzzle solving and progression across the overworld, and in the case of Mermaid's Cave, even the dungeons. There were so many cool moments and segments that hinged on the traveling back and forth between time periods. Ages was constantly pushing the time travel to the forefront of the player's mind. The Seasons mechanic is more or less just there. A neat little thing you can do. Sure, it's cool to change the screen to winter, freeze a pond blocking your way, and skate on across, but it's not an entire game's worth of cool. Most progression puzzles with the Seasons consist of, oh, I need vines on this wall. Hop on a stump, make it summer, and now there's vines. I'm not ragging on Seasons by any means. It's my favorite of the two if I'm being honest. The Seasons mechanic works, it's just a little featherweight to base an entire game on. But it works. It's passable. I honestly just wish we got a few more overworld segments like Tarn Ruins that had you actively puzzle solving while changing between the seasons screen to screen. This segment alone shows that the concept can work and can be utilized in a much more effective way if they just expanded that level of polish beyond Tarn Ruins. Maybe they could have even utilized the Rod of Seasons in a dungeon or two somehow. But as it stands, the Seasons mechanic is simply passable. And honestly, if you removed it from Seasons entirely, the game would be just as good as it is. Not exactly the sign of a mechanic to hang your game's hat on. One thing Seasons knocked out of the park though was the trading sequence. The trading sequence in each game will lead to a sword upgrade, the Noble Sword. The cool thing that Seasons does is that it doesn't make the sword the last thing you obtain in the sequence. The last person you trade with doesn't give you the sword outright. They simply tell you how to get the sword. And if you're not excited yet, this means that on any subsequent playthroughs, you can walk right up to the sword as soon as the area becomes available. You never, ever have to do the trading sequence again. You don't even have to initiate it. As long as you can remember how to get to the sword, it is there waiting for you. This is such a good idea that it is absolutely mind-boggling that the same setup isn't implemented in Ages. That is correct. If you want to get the Noble Sword in Ages, it's structured so that you have to go through the entire trading sequence. No ifs, ands, or buts. You have to do it. Every single time. Like, what was the disconnect here? Someone on the Ages team didn't get the memo? Maybe they were sour they didn't come up with the idea? Whatever the reason, this was a real misstep, and it really hurts Ages on repeat playthroughs. While all of these ideas and additions and exclusions shape the Oracles into the games they are, we haven't even touched on the pair's most ambitious idea of all, the one that links it all together. It's no secret that the Oracle games were meant to be played together, side by side. It's the hook, the pizzazz. Every other Game Boy series was doing multiple cartridge releases. Why not Zelda? Well, unlike Mega Man Battle Network 3, Oracle of Ages and Seasons don't just justify their 2 cartridges, they master the method. Both games are full length and fulfilling in their own rights. Sometimes I get the urge to play through Seasons completely detached from Ages just because I love the game itself. It's a fantastic Zelda adventure. They both are, but you get so much content from linking the games together. Linking the games will allow you to start your second adventure with a sword, and the oracles will know who you are in whatever game you're playing second. Zelda will also show up halfway through your second adventure and is interactable throughout. You'll also get the true ending, culminating in a battle between Kome and Kotake, Twin Rova, and finally, Ganon, albeit an incomplete mindless beast version of Ganon. Once you beat it, you get to see a nice montage crossover of all the characters across both games happily living their lives. Zelda gives you a kiss on the cheek, and Link gets a big-ass statue. That's actually pretty dope. Considering all the shit these heroes usually go through, I'm surprised we don't see more statues, to be honest. I like the statue. And these are just main plot points. There is so much more that go into these linked games. These snakes in Vasu's shop allow you to enter passwords to carry your rings from your first game into the next. There are characters who are spread across both games who will give you passwords to use for items and upgrades in the other game. This means even after you beat either ages or seasons, you still have a reason to re-explore the entire world for secrets that will be useful to you in the next game. In fact, to get the full effect and see all the content that there is to see in Ages and Seasons, you have to play them both twice. Seasons to Ages and Ages to Seasons. There's new, unique experiences each time in each order. Characters from your previous game will pop up in the next one. You can run into Queen Ambi taking a vacation in Holodrum. Rosa shows up on Crescent Isle to help you get your stuff back. The pirate captain is Ambi's husband she built the tower for, and even after they reunite, he's like, well, gotta get going, C's calling, and Ambi's just like, alright. You get to name Bippin and Blossom's son, J. Cole, and watch him grow up to absolutely burn down the rap game. Honestly, it's these little Easter eggs and additions that make the linked games so much fun, even more so than the final ending and boss. When I link these games, I'm not excited to fight Twin Rova in the Room of Rites. I'm excited to see the Subrosian show up at the Rolling Ridge to learn the Goron dance moves. I'm not excited to see Zelda for the billionth time. I'm excited to roll up on the Great Moblin just so I can kick his ass a second time. These games are fantastic. Each one a credit to the series. And the combination is just chef's kiss. It's insane to me that these games can be so different in their core philosophies and yet come together so harmoniously. But if you think about it, that's Zelda. A series that perfectly blends exciting action and mind-bending puzzles. A game that knows how to tell a story without overdoing it or overcomplicating that story. I think with these games, Capcom wanted to show that they understood Zelda, that they get it, that they were right to be trusted with this most precious of IPs. Here are two games that focused on the best parts of this series, combining to create a whole. And in doing so, they ended up delivering on aspects of Zelda in ways the series had never even seen before. And this was Capcom! Capcom! Not only did they not scratch the Jag, they brought that shit back, washed, waxed, and with a full tank. They were able to look at the Zelda series and say, yeah, we can do that. And then they actually did it. Hats off to you, Capcom, because that is pretty damn cool. Magnesis. I just realized that's the 3D magnetic gloves. Magnesis from Breath of the Wild.